Hello, everyone. There are two potential solutions to Australia's housing affordability crisis that I'm not hearing anyone else talk about. For those of you that only have a couple of minutes, I'll get to those 2 points quickly. But later in the video, I'll provide further context, some research data, charts, and graphs to back up these two potential solutions. But these are two, I'm sure I'm not the only person to think of them, but I'm not hearing any of our politicians talk about them. I'm not hearing economists, financial analysts talk about it. The social media political influencers don't seem to be talking about it. They're all talking about capital gains tax, negative gearing, immigration if they're on the right, or building more houses. We haven't built enough houses. Now, so the two solutions being, the banking regulator and freeing up the 13 million spare bedrooms that we have in this country. But I still think the Reserve Bank of Australia, long term, is the primary cause of many of our economic problems. And the Reserve Bank of Australia is the primary cause of our long term real estate mega hyper bubble, their decades of suppressing interest rates, deliberately creating inflation, the hundreds of billions of dollars the Reserve Bank of Australia created in their computer during the pandemic. But I'm going to put all that aside today. This is not a video about the RBA, and I'll link to some other videos I've done about that towards the end of the video. But the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, they don't work for the Reserve Bank of Australia, so they cannot set interest rates. So let's put the RBA aside. The first thing the government could do that, now these solutions might indirectly cost the government money down the track. There would be some lost tax revenue and some other consequences. But in terms of what they could do right now, today, that would be a $0 cost to them. They could do this tomorrow. The first thing they could do is with APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, the banking regulator, they could tell the banking regulator that to instruct the banks that there's a freeze on investment lending. So no new loans to real estate investors. And real estate investors made up 40% of new loans in the second half of 2025, and they've historically been 30 to 50% of loans. If you freeze investment lending, more loans available to people who actually want to buy a house to live, you take some of the investment speculation out of the market. I'll show some data on that later. Again, I'm a free market guy. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I do not like government solutions, especially government solutions to government-created problems. And this real estate hyper bubble is a government-created problem. But again, I'm operating within the context of, okay, there's a government. What could the government do? The second thing they could do is owner-occupiers, so just regular people who own homes. We've got lots of particularly older retired people who have 3 to 4 bedroom homes. Their kids have grown up and moved out. We have 13 million spare bedrooms roughly in this country. Why not say to these people, hey, if you'd like to rent out a bedroom to someone, tax free. You can rent it out. We're not going to charge you income tax. You can let the insurance company know you've got an extra person living there. Everything's above board. We're not going to assess that income for the age pension income test. Rent out a room, tax free. We'll leave you alone. Go and collect some extra income. Now, let's look at some data on this particular idea. So, the first thing I'd say, well, so let's focus on the 2 points. So, let's start with APRA, the banking regulator, and telling the banks you can't make new loans to investors. I don't know how long that would be, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months. Why don't they just start with a few months, see how it goes, and then reassess month by month? So, investors currently account for 39.7% of all new mortgage lending in Australia. So if we look at some data on that, this is from Tarek Brooker, avid commentator. I highly recommend following him. And this goes back to 2020. You can see when we're in the midst of COVID, in share of new mortgages to existing, this is for existing homes flowing to property investors. So this isn't new homes. In 2021, 26% of loans from banks were going to investors. Look at where it is now at the end of 2025. It's climbing. So banks are lending more to investors and less to regular people who want to buy houses. Now, again, I don't like the government interfering with the free market, but if the government, from its perspective, its goal is to take the speculation out of real estate, or homes are supposed to be a place to live, not like a speculative asset to make capital gains on. Well, why not just say, look, if you want to buy a house as investment, that's great. You come up with the money. The banks aren't going to loan you the money to buy that. You can, anyway, we'll get to it. The second point, the second data set goes back to 1991. So we're talking about 35 years of data here. So this is investor share of mortgage lending. So what percentage of loans When banks loan people money to buy real estate, what percentage of that is going to investors? You could see in the early 90s, 10%. It was low. And then it started to climb. It got as high as 50% in, I guess, 2003, 2004. It has come down from the peaks, but you can see again, roughly 30 to, since the millennium started, since 2000, you could say between 30 and 50% on average, depending on the time period, 30 to 50% of loans are going to investors. Right? I don't have a problem with investors borrowing money to buy houses, but you know, within the context of working with government to solve this crisis, that is something they could do that wouldn't cost them any money right now today, as opposed to trying to build more. It's costing billions of dollars to try and build more houses, to provide these 5% deposit schemes and all that. That's costing us, the taxpayer, a lot of money. I'm proposing a solution where the taxpayer has to cough up $0 upfront. Um, Speculation traps. So, 2.26 million property investors in Australia, about 50% of them are negatively geared. That's backed up by some of Tarek's great research and data here. He shows, so this is as of 2023. I guess that's because the data source is coming from the ATO and they're not reporting this data live. We see reports, report comes out and it shows data from a year or two ago or from a census or something like that. So the contrary to what some of the commentators out there will tell you, people who have six properties, 40% of them are negatively geared, which would be wealthy. I mean, if you own six investment properties, it would be fair to assume you're a wealthy person, possibly in the top 1% or getting close. Whereas a person who owns one property, and I've showed this in other videos, where 70% of real estate investors in Australia are on incomes of $100,000 or less. These are not rich people. It's not the 1% ripping you off. It's mum and dad investors, and half of them are negatively geared, meaning that the rent they collect is less than their costs. They have negative cash flow. They collect $600 in rent and they have $700 of cost to pay the mortgage, the interest, the council rates, the insurance, the property manager, the maintenance, right? They're not making money on rent. They're making money on the price going up. And we need to stop real estate prices from going up. It's destroying the country. Um, you know, this is just some commentary on, I've been working with the AI to collate all my research on this topic. And I talked about negative gearing and capital gains tax rules, I'm doing this video on Tuesday. The budget is tonight. We're going to see what the Treasurer or what the government in general does with all that. But residential mortgages, so Australian banks are hyper concentrated, lending money to people to buy into the real estate bubble. This data is from, I'll show Reserve Bank of Australia source as well, which confirms this data. It's actually a bit worse than that because it's from 2022. You can see most countries, their banks, when their banks, in terms of the bank's business, what percentage their business is, residential mortgages, loaning people money to buy residential real estate. You can see in most developed countries, there's a good sample of them here, 20, 30, maybe 40% of loans. Like look at the US and UK, in the UK, it's only 20%. US 30%, Australian banks over 60%, and I've found this from the Reserve Bank of Australia. This is a report I downloaded from the RBA, and the RBA themselves say that, or it's a report from the RBA's website. It's from their data, the RBA's data set, so it's from their data. My apologies. Hard to remember all this stuff on the fly, but residential mortgages represent about 2/3 of Australian banks' domestic lending, and mortgage debt is typically the largest liability on the balance sheet of an Australian household. That's correct. We have a lot of real estate debt, all right? So we've got this. So banks are hyper concentrated, lending money to Australian banks, lending lots and lots of money to people to keep buying up real estate, pushing the prices up, of course, helped by government stimulus programs, 5% deposit schemes, that sort of thing. So what I'm suggesting here is that if the government is going to be tinkering, like I don't want the government to start charging us more tax, like charging us more capital gains tax or charging us income tax when there's no actual net income, which is what, if they abolish negative gearing, that means they're going to charge you income tax when you don't actually have income. You're collecting $600 in rent, you're paying $700 in costs, you have negative $100 a week or a month, a week, that'd be a weekly rent. You have negative weekly income. How can you charge income tax on that? That's what, or How can you, not let that person offset that the same way that you offset buying, if you have to buy new work boots or something. Anyway, I didn't mean to get too deep into that. Let's have a look at the second solution, and that was me suggesting that, if we want to create more rentals, I mean, look at how much trouble the government's having trying to build houses, and look at what's going on in the world. We've got the war in Iran, um, what's going on in the Middle East, driving up the cost of raw materials to build houses. So houses are going to be more expensive to build. So rather than trying to build more rental properties, why don't we just say to people who already have spare bedrooms, hey, if you want to rent out a room, it's tax free. Like, that's why is that so hard for the government to do? It's not like they're not collecting much revenue there. I don't know exactly what the number is in terms of people renting out rooms at the moment, but why don't we just say to people, hey, especially if you're a retiree, you're on an age pension, you're on a fixed income. A lot of age pensioners we're seeing in the news, they're struggling with cost of living. So why don't we allow at least start by allowing people who are collecting an age pension, you got spare rooms there, rent them out. You can keep your pension. You'll get a little bit of extra income. And what I'm showing here is from the government news channel, the ABC. 13 million spare bedrooms belonging to older Australians could help ease housing crisis. So they have suggested this. This is from 2024. So credit to them for reporting on this, but I'm just showing sources that they're getting this from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and I've got the Australian Bureau of Statistics official government website up here, and looking at some stats. And housing utilization, almost 1 in 25. Sorry, here we go. This is the number. 77% of households have at least one bedroom spare. Now, I understand a lot of people are not going to want to rent out a spare room to a stranger, but some people will, especially if you tell people, hey, you could earn 300, because you could, if you're in Sydney or Melbourne and you've got a half decent house with a nice bedroom and you've got a nice kitchen and a backyard and other facilities, you might be able to rent out a bedroom for $300 a week easily, right? That's $300 a week extra income, tax free, for doing basically nothing. I mean, you might even be able to say to that person, "Hey, we'll rent the room to you for $200, but we'd like you to." I actually have a friend who does this, who rents out some rooms in his house, and as part of a lower rent or no rent situation, they do chores around the house. They mow the lawns, they do the dishes, they cook, they clean, as like a bartering kind of system. So why doesn't the government got all these spare bedrooms? 13, even the government propaganda news channel, the ABC Marxist News, is talking about 13 million spare bedrooms. You're telling me that we wouldn't be able to maybe half a million, 1 million of those? I'm talking about 5% of those bedrooms, even if they became available, that's another million people who have got access to a cheap rental. And again, I don't want to force this behavior on people, but just let people rent them out tax free. Let it stop charging tax and micromanaging people everywhere. Um, Now, this particular data set here, and I know it's down the bottom here, we're on the Australian Bureau of Statistics again, are just showing that the number of houses that have 3 to 4 bedrooms. So this is from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It's a 2021 census. That's the latest data I could get. So I understand it may have changed a bit, but I'm looking at official sources, all right, and have a look at how many number of bedrooms in private dwellings, so private houses. 3 bedrooms, 39%. 4 bedrooms, 34%. 77% roughly and I think they talk about this in the ABC um, article as well. Like 77% have a spare bedroom, and all these houses have got 3 or 4 bedrooms. There's plenty of. We're not in a supply shortage, and we'll look at some of that in a moment. 77% of households have at least one bedroom spare. 67%, sorry, I overstated the number. 3 and 4 bedroom homes make up 67%. It looked like a little bit higher number than that on the census, but we'll take that number. Now, over 80% of Australians aged 65 plus own their home. So this would be, if they're over 65, they're very likely to be. I mean, there's a few people who keep working into their 70s, but most Australians who are over 65 are retired. They're either collecting an age pension or they've got enough super that they don't need to collect one. So 80% of them own their homes. The home's completely paid for, and 3/4 of those homes contain 3 or more bedrooms. So most of them probably have two to three spare bedrooms. That's where this sort of 13 million spare bedroom number is coming from. So why can't we, you know, let's allow these retired people to earn, if they choose to earn some extra income renting out these rooms. Anyway, I'm hammering on that point a little bit too much, but older Australians represent the highest proportion of homeowners. Only over 80% of persons aged over 65 own their home, and that 84% of these homes were, quote, underutilized, meaning spare bedrooms, places for other people to live, right? So we don't have a supply shortage. We're not utilizing the houses we have better. In this particular graph here, now back in the 1960s and 70s, there were about 3.6 people living in each home, in each dwelling. Right now, I've excluded some of that data, and I couldn't find an accurate chart on it. And I understand, that people in the 60s and 70s had more kids, so that skewed the number. But if we look even at this would be going from 1980. In 1980, 2.9 people occupied the same dwelling, the same household. Look where it is now. It's down below 2.5. Now, this only goes to 2023, but I believe the number has dropped to 2.4. So we've got plenty of homes. We're just, again, I would say this is where the RBA is responsible, and the government, providing these 5% deposit schemes. People who normally wouldn't qualify for loans, a 28-year-old and a 26-year-old boyfriend and girlfriend, they go and buy a three-bedroom home, go into massive debt because they think, oh, well, you can't lose money on real estate. All you do is buy a house and it goes up in price. So why aren't they buying a house? That's what they want to do, buy the house. And then you end up with this. All right. Now, if we go to, the average, it was 3.6 in 1961, 2.52 today. And then there's the myth that we don't build enough houses. So let's have a look at this. Now, I know this is, a little bit of a parody sort of graph, but the data is accurate. New homes built per 1,000 people in the past decade. It's probably a year old now, this graph. Australia is second only to Switzerland, right? We've been building way more houses per person, and this would, as far as I'm aware, this accounts for immigration. So this accounts for the number of people in the country, the total population, which would include net migration. Australia is second only to Switzerland in the number of homes we're building per 1,000 people. All right. Now, so we're building plenty of houses, right? It's not if we come back to those, early points, I'm not suggesting that capital gains, negative gearing, lack of supply, and immigration aren't factors. And I did a video. So if you want to do a deeper dive into the RBA, into the immigration issue, if you're on YouTube, in the video below, I've linked these two other videos. You might not be able to see those. Sorry, because YouTube doesn't screen capture correctly. Software issue. But this particular video here about the real estate market, I did it in response to the Greens Marxist Senator Nick McKim. Of course, he's going to tell you it's the greedy 1%, the 1%ers are out to get you, as always. So we've got to tax them more. We've got to steal more money from them, because why should they have money when you don't have money? He doesn't understand the problem. So what I did in this video was I debunked some of his suggestions, and I showed that, unfortunately, the data does, while I'm not philosophically opposed to immigration, the data does show, if we look at other countries like Canada and New Zealand, they've had 30% real declines in their real estate market once their population growth stopped as a result of stopping net migration. And then, so there's a deeper dive in that particular video if you'd like to look at that one. And secondly, if you'd like to focus a bit more on the RBA and interest rates, I made a video a few days ago about, because there's this thesis out there now that that interest rates don't work anymore, and this was the topic of the video, that, interest rates are this blunt tool that, we've raised interest rates and we've still got inflation and housing crisis. Well, we haven't raised interest rates high enough. We haven't used it properly. And I've done a deeper data dive in that particular video. But anyway, just wanted to propose those two solutions. That, again, I'm a free market capitalist, a anarcho-capitalist. I like freedom, free markets. I don't like government solutions. But if the government is going to provide, quote, solutions, whether we want them to or not. So to the extent that the government is going to continue to interfere with the private market, with an attempt at having a free market, these are two simple things that could be done tomorrow. Number one, banking regulator APRA could tell the banks, you can't make any new loans to real estate investors. We need to let this market cool. What that would also do is if the banks, if 40% of their lending business, their residential real estate lending business, which is a big chunk of their overall business, if that suddenly evaporates for 3, 6, 9 months, now banks are going to make more loans to regular Aussies to go and buy the house. They'll have to compete with each other because now they want their slice of the pie, but the pie just got smaller. So that might actually push down mortgage rates a little bit as banks have to offer more deals to compete for that smaller market because they can't make those 40% loans now. 40% of their loans can't go to investors because they're locked out from loaning to investors. There's only 60% left which are owner occupiers, people who genuinely want to buy a house to live in. So I think that would create somewhat of a positive scenario for regular families trying to buy a house. And then, of course, 13 million spare bedrooms. Let people rent these rooms out. Don't stop charging them tax, right? We're in a crisis. You don't have to build a new house. We have all these bedrooms. Let the bedrooms be rented out. Don't regulate people. Don't tax people. Yes, I understand they'll have to let the insurance company know, and maybe it needs to let them do it above board because I'm sure some of this is already happening under the table. Let's allow it to happen freely and let's not tax it. Anyway, I've gone a little bit long on this one as per usual. Thank you so much for listening if you made it this far. Let me know what you think of those two ideas. I understand there would be some consequences. Obviously, a lot less revenue for state governments who rely heavily on stamp duty from investors, buying and selling into the real estate bubble. So I understand there's a indirect cost there in terms of lost revenue for states, but I don't think our goal. I mean, if the goal is to solve Australia's housing crisis, well, which one is your goal? Is your goal to solve the crisis for working class folk, or is your goal to preserve state government tax revenue? These state governments are so bloated. Done videos on that. That's a topic for another video. Thank you for listening and enjoy your day. Cheers.